Those who do not insist on their values and remain prepared to defend them by force will have to accept the values of others. Titus Gebel. Hello everyone, this is episode 28 of Citadelium. I guess long awaited because I haven't recorded in a couple of weeks. But today is a special episode because we do have our first guest on the podcast. Citadelium is now inviting guests to participate in the discussion about citadels around the world. And I'm really happy to have our first guest today, Francisco Litvay, who is COO at Tipolis. It is a company that designs, builds, and advises on next-generation free economic zones. You may have heard of some of their projects, and essentially, it started as a project called Free Private Cities, and Tipolis is now a for-profit arm of this project, as if I'm not mistaken. So also Francisco is co-founder and CEO of other companies like SETI and Atlantic Pacific Strategies, and the basically has been doing research on next generation free economic zones and governance structures since 2018, and I'm really happy to have him on my podcast. Hey Francisco, how are you?
Hey Yuri, I'm great. Thank you a lot for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for coming. I know that everybody's time is scarce these days. There's so much work going on around the world. There's a lot of work, specifically in terms of citadels. Everybody's trying to build something. And I'm really happy to see that because so far, for the past couple of years, people have been theorizing about citadels. You know, I personally have written some articles and I recorded some Citadelium episodes about this topic, and it's really interesting to, build what's called the citadel theory. But it's also really exciting to see practice showing up on my feeds. On the internet, people actually build things right now, and that's what I want to focus on going forward, is how we're actually building citadels. And as you may know from my podcast and my articles, citadels can be absolutely anything that you want them to be, from your personal residence to in your country of origin to a whole city out there. And today we're starting with a pretty advanced way of building citadels, which is what Francisco is engaged in, Free Private Cities project. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get interested in governance systems? What got you interested in that?
Well, I originally got interested in Austrian economics and libertarianism, free markets, all of that. When I was in high school, I started reading, Mises, Hayek, some Rothbard, and I started getting really interested into how the private sector could deliver what we call like public goods, and provide governance services. So I started, looking more into that field and seeing if there were historical examples or initiatives being done nowadays in which the private sector was taking functions which are usually considered to be something that only the state can do, right? And I eventually found a Facebook group called Cidades Empresariais. It's called Entrepreneurial Cities in English. I'm Brazilian, so it's a group in Portuguese. There's a big libertarian movement in Brazil, by the way. But so in this group, they started talking about all these new projects and books and so on. I started reading a couple of the main works in that field. So Your Next Government by Tom Bell is a great one. And also the book Free Private Cities by Titus Gebel. I got really into it. It was something I deemed very interested. And I started following, all the news on that space. Eventually, I saw that Titus posted a job posting for Free Private Cities, right? He was looking for an assistant over there. I applied, got the job, and have been working on the field ever since.
Yeah, that's a pretty good story, and I actually had a question for how you got into this and how you met Titus as well. Yeah, great that you covered it right now. Actually, it seems pretty straightforward. You saw how this thing, how Titus started the project, how he started developing it, and you just decided to apply, and here you are. That was in 2018 or 19.
Yeah, 2018. It's I guess two and a half years already. There's been a lot of news in the space and also at Free Private Cities since then. But yeah, I've been in this field ever since.
Okay. Well, then let me just go a little bit away from the citadels themselves, but I think it's also important to ask these questions because for people who are planning to establish their citadels, especially maybe not in their homeland. So, what is your homeland? Is this Brazil? What is your view of the term homeland? Do you feel like when you're not in Brazil, and as far as I know, right now you're not. Do you feel like you miss something when you're not in your country of origin? How do you feel being outside of it?
Yeah, so for context, I've been living outside of Brazil for 4 years now. First in Austria, I was doing my studies there. And this year I've become a nomad. I've been spending some months in Portugal. And how I define the term homeland, that is a pretty good question. I think, first of all, you can think of this in layers, right? So in one sense, like I am from this city where I was born and I have my friends and I have my family. But I'm also a Southern Brazilian. There's a region with its unique culture and unique, history. And then, broader, I'm a Brazilian. And then in a broader layer, I'm part of the Lusosphere, like this community of countries with this shared history and shared language. And then on an even broader sphere, like I'm a human being. But, at that point, it's already so generic and so detached, let's say, from any real commitments. So I think that's, you can define that in the terms of layers, but also it's very context specific how one would define homeland, because let's take the example of the Lusosphere, for example. It's a community of countries which are not really bound by geography, but they're bound by like a shared language, a shared religion, like a shared set of values, and a shared history. Right? Some other cultures don't really have this universalist aspect of them, that like they are much more geography bound, right? Some cultures, it doesn't really matter where you were born, but you're still, someone who is part of this Lusosphere or is part of the, an Anglo or something like that. Whereas some cultures are much more, attached to a place, like I would say some of the Eastern European cultures.
Yeah, and I guess it also has to do a little bit with what we and some people who cover citadels talk about when they talk about digital countries, because it's a similar concept that you're not really bound geographically. If if I wanted to set up a digital country that is that attracts people based on interests and shared values rather than their geographical attachment, then that's what it exactly is, right? So I think it rings a bell to many people here, and also people who practice what you just described, which is digital nomadism. So my question to you is, what do you think of digital nomadism? Do you think it's actually sustainable way of life, or do you think it's something that's really interesting to people who are young right now and who can afford to work remotely, but then at some point there comes a time when they just need to settle down?
Yeah, more of the latter opinion. So I currently am a nomad, but I don't think I will be for my whole life, because I do want to have children and I do want to build a family, and for that it's much harder if you're traveling all the time, if you're not bound to a place. But I think it's a very, very good tool, a very good mode of life for discovering places where one would live, or even, setting more than one base, right? Part of this whole idea of free private cities is that you have competition for citizens, right? That the jurisdictions are competing for new businesses and new people to work there and new people to live there. If people are 100% attached to where they live and they wouldn't go away for anything in the world, then it doesn't really matter how good your jurisdiction is, because no one will really come, right? So the more mobile people are, the easier it is to go somewhere else and get established there. The easier it will be for these competitive pressures to apply at a governance level, right? For the more well-governed countries or well-governed cities to get more prosperous. So I think there is value in being somewhat mobile, but I don't think you necessarily need to be a nomad who has zero roots, right? I think you can use nomadism to discover places where you would like to build roots, and then you pick a couple of them. Let's say, instead of having all of your life in one country, you have your life divided into 2 or 3 countries that you really like, or that you really share the values of those peoples. And I think that is a much more anti-fragile way of life, right? That having a couple of bases where, okay, if the US collapses, then I know that I still can, live in Brazil. I know how to live with this culture, and I already am established here. So it serves as kind of an insurance, right? I think that is one of the advantages of trying out nomadism, at least for a while.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you actually touched upon an important point here, and what some people call flag theory, which means that you have several flags or poles that kind of describe several domains of your life that you can actually make a little more sovereign these domains of life. And one of those is maybe having a couple of citizenships in other countries and a couple of residences. And for that, of course, you would probably need to travel first. And, there's so much information out there. There's so many blogs, but none of these blogs, none of these YouTube videos and feedbacks and reviews of any of those places will do those places justice until you actually visit them and see life in those places for yourself. And the only way to do that is obviously to spend some time on the road. So the flag theory says that once you have understood which places you like, maybe you should pursue getting a passport or at least permanent residency in those places, so that yes, you can spend most of your time and actually live in one place with your family and just have a permanent home. But in case something bad happens, and we can never predict that something bad happen, but it can, and history shows that it can. In case a black swan event happens, you can get out of where you are, and you have a safe harbor. You have a secondary place where you can stay. I think it's very important to understand for many people, and even if you are extremely patriotically inclined, and I know some people like that, and I don't have anything, against such patriotism. I just think that from a practical perspective, your patriotism can play a smaller role if some things that are completely outside of your control or the control of anybody in your country happen, right? And that's why you should have a secondary place where you can, I don't like the word escape, but at least enjoy that place when things go sour in your place of residence. So, well, let's get into the actual crux of the matter, the Free Private Cities project, Free Private Cities themselves. Can you please describe to the people who are new to this concept, in short, what Free Private Cities are and how they are different from regular cities, and how they are different from what we normally have and call as free economic zones or free administrative zones?
Okay, so what is a free private city, right? A free private city is a jurisdiction that has a different regulatory, legal, economic system from the rest of its surrounding areas, right? So it's a special jurisdiction inside a country. And that jurisdiction is run, it's operated, it's developed by a private company, which provides governance as a service. Basically, you have a real contract with this company as a citizen, and there it's defined, how much you must pay for the governance services, and there it's also laid out the rights that you have as a citizen, and that's pretty much the base of the idea. What's the difference to regular systems? First of all, you have a real contract, right? You have something that you can take to independent arbitration, and you're in a completely different relationship than what you have in a normal state, right? When you're under a constitution where you're a subject, and they can just change the laws at their whims, and you don't have a say in it. Whereas on a contract, if the operator decides to change something substantial in the contract and you didn't agree to, you can sue him for damages. That is a base difference from the free private cities model to the traditional models, and it's something that provides a lot more stability. What else? Besides that, you also have the incentives, right? So there is a big incentives difference when you're a private community, and this is something very similar to what Hoppe says, right, in his Democracy, the God That Failed, that, the monarch, because he's the owner of a country, let's say, he has this long-term incentive to not, exploit the country too much, that its capital value would decline. It's a similar thing when in a free private city, right? You have the city that is getting revenue from its citizens, right? So it wants to get as much revenue as possible, but it won't raise the fees too high or lower the service quality to a point where the current revenue it will get will be at the expense of the future value of the city, right? They won't try to gain this present revenue at the expense of future capital value of the city. So it's a model that has an incentive to think of the short term, but also the long term. And that's something that is lacking in current democratic systems, right? You don't have this long-term incentive. You have the short-term one, which is the election cycle, but no one is economically incentivized to think on the long term.
Exactly, low time preference, and that's the famous and favorite term that Bitcoiners use these days to signifying your care for the future, right? So you really care what happens in the future instead of just living day by day and spending as much as you can, consuming as much as you can, and destroying everything you see while doing that. I think it's a really powerful concept, actually popularized by Saifedean Ammous in his book The Bitcoin Standard. But I can also see how Titus Gebel's book Free Private Cities was highly influenced by Austrian economists, especially Hans Hermann Hoppe, and the book that you mentioned, Democracy, A God That Failed. I really enjoyed that book, and when after that, I read Titus Gebel's book. I clearly saw how he was influenced by Austrian economists like Hoppe. So he decided to actually expand on the topic and provide an actual solution to the problem described in Democracy, A God That Failed. Because if you read the book, which I highly recommend, Hoppe talks about how monarchy is actually much better than democracy, but not perfect, not just yet perfect enough for us to call ourselves anarcho-capitalists. And the way that he sees his type of or his way of doing monarchy is essentially more of what Titus explains in Free Private Cities, which is a privately run city or little, you can call it a kingdom, you can call it a principality, it doesn't really matter, as long as the one premise is clear, that citizens of this place, of this citadel, are more like clients rather than rather than sheep that you farm, and that's what happens in nation states of today. And I really love the concept. And after I read Titus's book, I really started thinking that this was possible, and this was the way to go. And I got interested in the project itself, and sure, I started following the blog, and I realized that there are actual tangible results coming from this project. Just a couple of years after the project started, there was already an announcement that they were working, or you guys were working on a project somewhere in a warm place that you didn't really announce first, but then we got the news, and that news was about the ZEDEs or ZEDEs, or special economic zones in Honduras. And there's a couple of them right now. The first one that I would like to talk about is Prospera on the island of Roatan in Honduras. So I got really excited about this because it's a real place that is being built on the basis of the Free Private Cities project. And I guess we can safely call it the most innovative free economic zone in the world right now. So, Francisco, what is so different about the Prospera ZED, and how do you think it is more attractive than other free economic zones that exist in the world right now? Because there are quite a few of them in the world, but this one seems to be really out there. This one really seems to be innovating. In what way?
Also, the ZEDEs in Honduras, so the term means employment and economic development zones, are one of the most advanced special economic zone regimes in the world, in the sense of autonomy given to these zones to try out new/better models, right? For governance, for dispute resolution, for just operations, all of it. The ZEDEs have, for example, the autonomy to select their own legal system. They can define pretty much all of the rules besides criminal law. So criminal law is still under the jurisprudence of Honduras. You still need to keep Honduran criminal law. But for all things civil, business related, family related, you can define your own system, right? And Prospera selected a common law framework based on American common law. They created their own Roatan Common Law Code, which is a simplified version of American common law, and also incorporating some best practice elements from many jurisdictions around the world. But they also give you the opportunity in Prospera to choose the legal system of any country in the OECD to do business, right? So it's you really have a lot of choice, right? You can select whichever model fits best for you, and then you can run your business based on that model and have, in case there are any disputes, it can then be resolved in their private arbitration center that they also have. So Prospera has the Prospera Arbitration Center, where disputes automatically go to, unless someone decides to pick a different arbitration panel or organization to do the arbitration. And insofar you have this autonomy to choose the governance framework that you're in, you also have the dispute resolution element, where they have their own arbitration center, they have their own independent judges. So they're not dependent on the Honduran judges, Honduran courts, which are not famous for being super efficient and so on. And besides that, they also have a very efficient model for operations, which is following the Sandy Springs model in Georgia, right, for delivering public services through private contractors, issuing these requests for proposals, and then some private contractor can say, hey, I want to do the security in Prospera. They have this selection process, and if at any point they define that, okay, this guy is not delivering the services as promised, they can unilaterally cancel the contract and immediately look for someone else. So they have private security, they have private everything, basically, except for the whole outside, how do you say, like interaction with the outside world, which is still under Honduras. So, like foreign relations and the military and all these things are not under Prospera because they're not an independent, a sovereign jurisdiction, right? They're a special zone inside Honduras. So everything internal, for their own internal governance, policing, security, infrastructure, that's in the reach, that's in the grasp, that's something they can do. And for everything that's outside, so border control, foreign relations, that remains with Honduras.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see because right now, especially with the COVID situation, I guess the island of Roatan and Prospera, they weren't really able to have their own dictate in in terms of what happens, right? They had to follow the Honduran law and regulations when it comes to things like mask mandates or lockdowns or any of that stuff, right? Because this is outside of their jurisdiction.
Well, the thing is, currently there isn't anyone really living in Prosper. They only have an office building for their own team, but there's not a city built there yet, right? They're still working on building new housing for people to move into Prosper. So even if they did try out something different for COVID, there wouldn't be anyone for it to be applied to, all the ZEDE projects are still under construction, right? You don't have real cities. You already have the jurisdiction, you already have the legal systems, but not the residents and the tenants. And that's the next step for this year, right? That's what they want to, by the end of this year, already starting to get the first e-residents, the first companies operating, and the first people living there full time.
Well, nevertheless, it's a great first step towards fully autonomous citadels. And of course, as Bitcoiners, we kind of think long into the future and we dream of this world of tens of thousands of fully sovereign citadels. But you can't get everything right away, of course, and you have to start somewhere. And I think the Prospera project is a really good place to start. What would you answer to someone who says things like, well, it's not truly autonomous, it's not truly sovereign, and Honduras can just take over at any time they want, like some other larger countries happen to take over their smaller, more independent regions, right? So what's the answer to that?
I mean, I don't think you can ever give a definitive answer because it's something that will always be, it will always be a threat that this jurisdiction is taken back. But there are a lot of things you can do to try to secure yourself and to make the incentives aligned so that there is no problem with the host country. So in terms of protection, the solution in this case is to have the operating company in the US, and Honduras, as a signatory of the New York Convention, accepts these international arbitral awards. So if Honduras expropriates the property of the operating company, which is based in the US, and it's deemed, in international courts that Honduras, is guilty of that, then every country in the world can expropriate Honduran property in their jurisdiction, right? So it's something that would bring a big economic cost for Honduras. In Honduras, also, the ZEDEs are not a law. They were passed as a constitutional amendment. So that means that to undo them, they would need a full majority, right? A qualified majority, which is 2/3 of the votes in parliament. So that's much harder normally than a simple majority of 51%. And then you also have the incentives part, right? So the ZEDEs they're creating jobs, they're attracting international investors, they're doing all these things. And they're also giving 15 to 17%, probably it's around that value, but around 15% of the money they earn, the ZEDEs, is going directly to Honduras, to these funds that are developing infrastructure and being used also to fund education. So part of the revenue of the ZEDEs is going towards developing Honduras as a whole, and not only the ZEDEs. So they have an incentive to actually treat the ZEDEs well because they want more of that money to develop the whole country.
So, do I understand it correctly that as a resident of Prospera, you will have to pay a fee, like an annual fee, for example, a residency fee, and that is essentially the revenue of the Prospera project. But at the same time, they will also take in some taxes on businesses. So if you run, a coffee shop or whatever, you'll have to pay a corporate tax, which is going to be much smaller than in many other jurisdictions, of course, but nevertheless, there's a corporate tax. So that revenue goes to Prospera, or rather the managing company behind Prospera. And then from that revenue, the managing company pays the 15 or whatever percent to the Honduras government as their fee to do what they wish to do with that, basically contributing to the budget. Is that the flow of money?
That is the flow of money, and one of the points that one has to take into account is that in these first projects you have to give concessions, right? You're still operating in the real world, and in the real world there are problems when you are a tax haven, right? Other countries blacklist you, and Prosper didn't want to get blacklisted, so they included some taxes, like a 5% VAT tax, value-added tax, a 10% tax on presumed income sourced within Prospera, and also a land tax. So that way they're not a blacklisted jurisdiction, and then more countries can do business with them. But it's still much, much lower than the great majority of countries in the world, and the majority of Western states where you have like this more solid governance.
And for people who want to, let's say they really like the idea, the project itself, and they want to move to Prospera and open their business there and maybe build a house or buy a house that is being built right now, are they getting a residency permit specifically for Prospera or the island of Roatan, or is it going to be a general Honduran residency permit?
Now, these things are separated, right? So you have to be able to, first of all, you have to be able to get into Honduras to get to Prospera, right? So if you're someone who would not be able to get into Honduras as a country, you won't be able to physically get to Prospera, right? So if, I don't know, you're a terrorist that Honduras doesn't want in, then forget it, you're not getting in. And then also there is Prosper itself, so you have to sign a contract with them. There are different kinds of contracts, and you can check that on the website. There is like a contract for e-residents, there is a contract for workers, there's a contract for people who want to become real residents there, and then you're only going to be able to live in Prosper if you sign the contract and they accept you. So, for example, as an e-resident, and if you apply there and they accept you as an e-resident, you get 30 days a year to stay in Prosper, right? To take care of your business and whatever. And so it's something that depends on them approving you and you signing and the contract and paying the corresponding fees.
Yeah, that's a very interesting model. Like I said, we are seeing the emergence of the first free private cities, and it may not be 100% free as some people would like it to be, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And as far as I know, there's also another ZEDE project in Honduras as well, called the City of Murasan. This city is inland, so it's not an island. And is it the same as a Prospera? Is the concept completely the same, or are there any differences between these two?
There are actually many differences between the two. So Prospera is more focused towards tourism and services, right? They actually have their own company called Prospera Hiring Solutions, where they're trying to provide services to outside companies from Honduras working in Prospera. Whereas Murasan has a more industrial focus. So they are already creating these warehouses and trying to attract more industrial tenants. The main value proposition of Murasan is really providing security to the residents and like a good level of infrastructure, whereas Prospera is focusing a bit more on attracting tourists and also getting their e-residency program up and running, right? So, for example, just on the matter of objectives and what each project is doing, Prospera is just putting a lot of effort into launching their e-residency program so they can start having business people worldwide establish their business in Prospera. but they don't have as much housing being built yet. Whereas Morazan is already, finishing their big warehouses where they're going to house their industrial tenants, and the first apartments where the workers will be able to live should already be done this month, right? So they're really focusing on getting these intensive industrial labor running, whereas Prosper has this whole, services, tourism focus.
Yeah, that's excellent, and I guess it also is a great experiment to see which model will work best. And maybe these two models are just meant to be different because one is an island, one is beautiful, great for tourism. The other one is inland and probably in an area that requires more production of stuff. So that's why they focus on production and on different types of labor there. So I do know that there are also similar projects in other countries in the world. If you had to mention a couple more that may or may not be related to free private cities, what would be your favorite projects?
So first of all, it's worth mentioning Honduras as a whole. There are other groups now trying to get their own ZEDEs running or trying to incorporate territories that they own to the ZEDE. So the ZEDE law has this really interesting article which allows any landowner to try to annex their land to an existing ZEDE or just create their own ZEDE, right? So it doesn't even have to be neighboring land. So let's say you want to you buy some land in the south of the country and then you want to annex it to the Prosper ZEDE. If Prosper accepts it, like you make a requirement and they accept it, then that can become part of the Prosper ZEDE as well and have its own, have the same legal system. So you already have groups that are trying this, like trying to acquire land in different parts of the country and make it a ZEDE or make it part of an existing ZEDE. And in terms of private cities, you have a lot of projects across the world, but what most of these projects lack is this legal autonomy part, right? So, for example, in Brazil, the country I'm from, you have, like more than 4 or 5 private city projects, like full-fledged cities, right? I'm talking about big real estate developments, but their main value add is, this walkability, new urbanism, smart city stack, but not the better place of doing business stack simply because they don't have the autonomy. So I can name a couple of these projects which are very interesting as an example of the private sector developing a city and providing governance services. So you have Urbitá, which is a satellite city to Brasilia. You have Cidade de Pedra Branca, which is in the south. You have some cities in the northeast. You have some in Africa, like Nkwashi, which is a satellite city to in Zambia, to the capital. And you also have some other cities in Central Africa and West Africa being built by Rendeavor and these other big real estate developers. Some of these are inside free trade zones. Some of these have free trade zone status themselves, but it's not this autonomy that we're looking for. It's more like, custom duties and some tax exemptions and some regulatory exemptions, but not the freedom to select the legal system that you're living in, right?
Yeah, and I guess that's exactly why the Honduras cities are called the most advanced administrative and economic zones out there. So, where is Francisco's personal citadel going to be? Do you have plans to move to one of the ZEDEs or maybe to one of the other free private cities in the world, or do you have a plan maybe to build your own based on all this valuable experience that you're getting?
I would love if there were to be a free private city in some of the Portuguese-speaking countries, right? I would love a free private city in Brazil or in Portugal or any other Portuguese-speaking country for that matter. If there is any at some point, I might move. At this point, I don't consider moving to Roatan or Morazan, but this is more of a personal issue, right? I just wouldn't move to Honduras at this point. But if they start, attracting a lot of people and, the housing looks nice and everything seems to be going well, I would consider moving at some point. There are some things which worry me about Honduras, like the hurricane situation. I would rather not be in a country that has like this natural disaster risk. But that is something that, every person must choose, right? There, hundred factors that one could count in such a moving decision, like culture, like food, like natural disaster risk, climate, and you can't reduce it only to these like taxes and property rights. That is something that is really important, but it's your whole life that you're trying to choose. You're like, where you're going to be based. It can't be just because you're going to pay 5% less taxes. It has to be something substantial.
Exactly. I think it's always about trade-offs here, and there are many different offshore jurisdictions where you pay absolutely no tax, like zero tax, and the thing with those jurisdictions is that you still have to be present most of the year in those jurisdictions, and sometimes yes, they look nice on pictures, they look nice on videos, but personally, I have this type of character that would get tired of being in such an environment all the time. I would only consider it for a vacation. It can be a 2 week or 1 month vacation, but probably no more. And it just doesn't let you work sometimes, right? Plus, as you mentioned, there can be these weather related risks, and maybe you just don't, the population doesn't grow on you, right? Maybe the cultures are too different that you don't want to be there anymore. I know some people who have lived in some Southeast Asian countries for quite a few years already, and they're really tired of it. They want to get out. They just don't know where to go, and the move is going to be a really big decision for them. So they're still thinking whether they should go back to where they came from, or maybe try a new place again, which can be a pain, and will probably force them to be a digital nomad for another year or two. So I completely understand all these reservations, and I do hope that at some point someone, or maybe even you yourself, will get enough resources to start building an actual free private city in Brazil or any other Portuguese speaking country, so you can actually be where you love being, among the people that you love, and enjoy these new conditions or together with them. Maybe invite some of the people that you love to those free private cities, and enjoy the shared a new life, life of shared values, and maybe a little bit segregated and further away from the people that you dislike. But such is life, and we have to make these choices. Again, thanks for joining. Thanks for contributing your time to the podcast. It was a really interesting discussion, and perhaps we can do this again sometime in the future when there has been more progress in one of the free private cities that are being built right now, or maybe new ones will appear. I don't know. Just to wrap this up, can you tell some people who are interested where to find you and how to reach out?
Yes, my handle is Fred Litvay pretty much everywhere. My work at Tipolis, you can just take a look at tipolis.com. That's this private company that's trying to establish new free private cities. And we actually have some pretty interesting leads, which may turn into full-fledged projects by the end of the year or by next year. Whenever we have some news, we will, let you guys know. So just keep following the page. And for more content on, free private cities, the theory, the model, how would it work, the basic questions answered, just go to freeprivatecities.com.
And that's it for this episode. I hope you liked the conversation and the format, and until next time.